Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, October 23rd, 2023. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks all for joining us. President Biden is talking about his weekend conversation with Pope Francis. The two men spoke yesterday in a rare phone call. According to the White House, they discussed the president's trip to Israel and efforts to guarantee the delivery of food, medicine, and humanitarian aid to Gaza. We'll hear from the president himself coming up. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby declined to say today if the Biden administration is urging Israel to delay a ground invasion into Gaza. His comments come as Israel's military has ramped up its aerial offensive against Hamas and as 20 more trucks carrying humanitarian aid have arrived in the region. And on Capitol Hill, House Republicans are holding a closed-door Speaker Candidates Forum tonight. The meeting follows last week's vote to reject Ohio's Jim Jordan as a potential replacement and before a floor session tomorrow where they could hold another vote for Speaker. We begin at the White House and President Biden, who was asked at an event that was focusing on the economy, about his conversation with Pope Francis.
The Pope and I are on the same page. He was very, very interested in what we were doing to deal with some of the crises that we're facing, particularly in Israel this time around. And I laid out to him what the game plan was, how we thought we should be providing the kind of assistance to Israel that needed. And the Pope was across the board supportive of what we're doing. Thank you.
Should Israel, is the U.S. supporting the hostages for a ceasefire deal?
Why did you?
We should have a ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire. We should have those hostages released, and then we can talk.
Has there been any progress on that?
And the Jerusalem Post is reporting that Hamas has released two more hostages. Both captives are Israeli women in their 80s. They were released to the International Red Cross late this afternoon, who then took them to Rafah, where they were met by Israeli security officials. Their husbands, also in their 80s, remain in captivity. And today's release comes after two American hostages were set free on Friday. Here's John Kirby with more.
On Friday, I think you all know, we successfully secured the release of two Americans that had been taken hostage by Hamas during the horrific terrorist assault on the 7th of October. And the president had a chance to speak with them and with their families, as he told other families that he met in Tel Aviv, family members of others who have been taken hostage. We have no higher priority than the safety of Americans that are being held around the world, and we're going to continue around the clock to see if we can get them home with their families where they belong. It is literally an hour-by-hour effort here at the White House and at the State Department to find out where these folks are and to try to make the effort to get them out and get them back. As Karine just spoke about, of course, first convoys over the weekend of humanitarian assistance across that border and was able to reach Palestinians in need, and as she also said, we're going to continue those efforts going forward. It's important that the aid be sustainable, and that's what we're focused on. And of course, throughout the weekend, the president received briefings from his national security team on all the latest developments. And yesterday, as you know, he convened calls with Prime Minister Netanyahu, His Holiness, Pope Francis, and then, of course, with the leaders of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. I'm sure you all saw the joint statement from all those leaders that they released last night. I won't reiterate it, but you can hopefully take away from that a real clear consistency and unanimity for Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism, while, of course, adhering to international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians. Now, we've also seen over the course of the last few days, actually the course of the last week, but certainly over the last couple of days of the weekend, an uptick in rocket and drone attacks by Iranian-backed proxy groups against military bases housing U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria. And we're deeply concerned about the potential for any significant escalation of these attacks in the days ahead. At the direction of President Biden, the Secretary of Defense has ordered the military to take steps to prepare for this, to ensure that we're postured appropriately, both in terms of being able to defend our forces and respond decisively as needed. Secretary of Defense has directed 2 carrier strike groups to the region, and we are now sending more air defenses to U.S. air bases in the region. Now, we know these groups are supported by the IRGC and the regime. We know Iran continues to support Hamas and Hezbollah. And we know that Iran is closely monitoring these events, and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks and spurring on others who may want to exploit the conflict for their own good or for that of Iran. We know Iran's goal is to maintain some level of deniability here, but we're not going to allow them to do that. We also are not going to allow any threat to our interest in the region to go unchallenged. We demonstrated last week that we have and will use the military capables available to us to protect and defend those interests. And those capabilities are getting bigger and better every day. As President Biden has said, our message to any hostile actor seeking to escalate or widen this conflict is very simple. Don't do it. With that, take some questions.
John, is it your view that the Israelis should begin their Gaza offensive whenever they feel ready?
It's our view that the Israeli Defense Forces, Steve, need to decide for themselves how they're going to conduct operations. We're not in the business of dictating terms to them, and we're certainly not going to be in the business here from the White House of previewing any future operations one way or the other. That would be inappropriate.
Yesterday, CNN reported the Biden administration has pressed Israel to hold back an invasion of Gaza, to allow for the release of more hostages, and for more aid to reach the area. John Kirby was asked about that and whether the administration has heard of other countries making the same request.
MJ, I won't speak for other nations and what communications they might be having with Israel. I can tell you we have, since the beginning of the conflict, in the early hours, maintained a level of communication with our Israeli counterparts to ascertain their intentions, their strategy, their aims, to see what their answers are to the kinds of tough questions that any military ought to be asking before you launch any kind of a major operation. Have you thought through the branches? Have you thought through the sequels? Have you thought through the unintended consequences? And so we are in active conversation with them about that.
He also talked about the role the U.S. Navy is playing in the Eastern Mediterranean.
You got the Gerald R. Ford Strike Group that's in the Eastern Mediterranean. You saw Secretary of Defense Austin announce that the Eisenhower Strike Group, which is still crossing the Atlantic right now, will operate for a time in the Med, and then she's going to go on through and into the Central Command Area of Responsibility, the Middle East, the Gulf region. They are there for two purposes, and I'm going to say it again, and you're probably sick of me saying this, but it's true. One is to deter any other actor from widening, deepening this conflict, and two is to make sure that we are ready, poised, and able to protect and defend our national security interests in the region writ large. That's what they're there for.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby at today's White House briefing. You can see the entire event at cspan.org. House Intelligence Committee Chair Mike Turner also talked about the timing of a ground invasion and how it affects humanitarian aid into Gaza and the hostages held by Hamas.
Well, I would say certainly getting aid in and getting the hostages out is incredibly important and a top priority. I do think that the United States should not be interfering in Israel's attempts to prosecute this war and this conflict with Hamas. We don't want to put them in a disadvantage. At the same time, we've got to get an environment where the hostages can get out and that aid can get in. That's going to be a difficult balance, but we certainly hope for the best.
I've seen a range of numbers, but one of the most recent numbers I saw was about 200 hostages being held by Hamas. We saw 2 Americans were released Friday, which may have prompted the movement of aid. Do you think Hamas will continue releasing hostages if aid is sent into Gaza?
Well, certainly we know that the portions of Hamas that committed these incredible atrocities, killing over 1,000 innocent civilians, Israelis, appeared to be operating separate from the leadership of Hamas. So there's a period where Hamas is reacting to try to understand what their new environment is, and I think they too perhaps may have been surprised of the extent of hostages that they found taken into Gaza. Hopefully, as they understand the importance of returning those innocent hostages, that the leadership of Hamas will answer that call. And certainly it's a good sign seeing the initial 2 that have been released.
House Intelligence Committee Chair Mike Turner on Fox News Radio. Meanwhile, Hezbollah terrorists continue to fire anti-tank missiles at northern Israeli military bases. The attacks have prompted the evacuations of thousands in the area and a response from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said if Hezbollah were to launch a war with Israel, quote, "It will make the mistake of its life. We will cripple it with a force it cannot even imagine, and the consequences for it and the Lebanese state will be devastating." Those comments were echoed today by Israel's Deputy Ambassador to the U.S., Eliav Benjamin.
Make no mistake, like every other nation in the world, Israel has the right and, in fact, the duty to defend its citizens against the brutality of terrorism. We will ensure that the Hamas war machine is eliminated. And for that, we will not and should not apologize. As for Israel's northern border, Hezbollah is responsible for all the acts of terrorism coming from Lebanon. Choosing to enter the conflict would pull the state of Lebanon into a destructive war. Israel doesn't wish to have a multiple front war with Hezbollah, but we are prepared to do whatever it takes to negate any threats that come our way. As President Biden said, don't.
Deputy Ambassador Benjamin was speaking at an event at the Heritage Foundation today. You can see all of his comments at cspan.org. And the State Department is urging Americans not to travel to Lebanon and recommending to the U.S. citizens there to, quote, make appropriate arrangements to leave the country, and that the U.S. citizens who choose not to depart prepare contingency plans for emergency situations. That statement, partially a statement from the State Department, came out over the weekend. You're listening to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Campaign 2024 coverage is your front row seat to the presidential election. Watch as we follow candidates on the campaign trail with meet and greets, speeches, and more as you make up your own mind. Campaign 2024 on the C-SPAN networks, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or anytime online at cspan.org. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics.
Live Sunday, November 5th on In Depth, author and former ACLU president Nadine Strawson joins Book TV to talk and take calls about civil rights, free speech, censorship, and more. She's the author of Defending Pornography, Hate, and the recently published Free Speech, What Everyone Needs to Know, a guide to free speech law and the debates surrounding it. Join in the conversation with your phone calls, Facebook comments, and texts. In Depth with Nadine Strawson, live Sunday, November 5th at noon Eastern on Book TV on C-SPAN 2.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day, and weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Congress returns this week with the battle over the House speakership continuing. The Senate plans to vote on the nomination of Michael Whitaker to be the next FAA administrator. And this evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, House Republicans will be holding a closed-door Speaker Candidates Forum. This forum follows last week's vote to reject Jim Jordan as the new Speaker. Congressman Jordan was removed after failing to win a majority in 3 separate votes on the House floor. Tennessee Republican Tim Burchett talked about tonight's meeting on Fox Business.
When you have members of leadership that just keep throwing the monkey wrench into the system and just trying to wreck it, we're going to continue down this path. But good thing about this party is we have a very deep bench. Every one of those 9 members would be a step up, and I believe would be a great leader.
Look, I understand what you're saying, and I think our viewers support, wanting to ensure that the Republicans are tough and fight back on some of the issues you see on the other side. But let's face it, you and 6 other lawmakers voted to remove Kevin McCarthy, and now we're in this mess where you can't find a leader. You signed a letter saying that you'd accept consequences like censure if holdouts would agree to vote for Jim Jordan. California Congressman Tom McClintock is mocking the effort. He sends a sarcastic letter to Matt Gaetz, writing, quote, your letter of October 20th, in which you graciously offer to martyr yourselves as long as you can get your way, is perhaps the most selfless act in American history. How do you see this?
Well, Tom is a lifer. I mean, he's part of the, he's part of the machine, obviously. He voted against term limits, for goodness sakes. I mean, who does that in the Republican Party? So, we have a very diverse group. We have 9 capable people that can handle this thing. We follow the rules that Kevin McCarthy voted for during this, which were voted on unanimously by the conference, by the way. And so, everybody keeps saying that we've wrecked this thing. How did we wreck something that was $33 trillion in debt? We went up $1 trillion in debt 3 months this year already. We're paying $1 trillion a year in interest. I would dare say that no one in leadership was actually focused on that. And that's why we're in the situation we're in. It's out of frustration. Well, Maria, all this is just a road. It's just a blip on the screen if our financial system collapses, which it is on the way doing. And by the way, that $1 trillion of interest a year is mostly paid to the country of China.
Meanwhile, Maryland Democrat Glenn Ivey told Fox 45 in Baltimore that House Democrats can only be hopeful that a candidate who can win on the floor emerges.
It's virulent, nasty fighting going on in the Republican caucus over there, but hopefully they can find a way to move past that, rally behind someone that they can put forward. If they don't have enough votes, depending on who it is, the Democrats might be willing to support that person. But they've got to take the next step forward. They got to get past Jim Jordan and come back with somebody reasonable that we can try and find a way to work with.
Well, I mean, the clock is ticking, obviously. I mean, we have this support for Israel that the president is pushing for. That needs to be enacted on. And we're also a month away from the government shutting down. What do you think the likelihood of that is?
Yeah, I mean, there's real concern on both of those fronts. Don't forget Ukraine, also humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. And there's a lot of other work that the American people need us to get done to address the issues that are challenging the United States and those people in their lives every day.
And we heard Representative Burchett mention about 9 House Republicans running for the Speaker nomination. That's something Bloomberg's Eric Wasson says is unprecedented.
What strikes me about the list is that it's very large. We've really never seen anything like this. The last round was Steve Scalise, the majority leader, versus Jim Jordan, the Judiciary Chairman. Scalise came out on top. He then bowed out. Jordan had his 3 strikes to try to get the full speakership, and that didn't work. And now we have 9. And this is going to be, basically they'll whittle it down very quickly. They'll go through rounds on Tuesday in which, the loser in each round gets pulled. But this is a very large list. But
you're surprised so many people want the job.
Well, exactly. That's right. No, I think the way it's become a very tough job. As some people say, it's the worst job in Washington. Ken Buck, one of the people who was opposing Jordan, he had in fact said he was going to support Emmer, but he said it was because he didn't like Emmer and wanted Emmer to have the worst job in Washington. So
there's a speaker candidate tonight at 6:30. What happens in that's a closed door hearing?
That'll be a closed door meeting, and there'll be about each member will be able to introduce themselves for 2 minutes, and then there'll be a Q&A session and then closing remarks. So this is when they'll have the chance to lay out. I think there's hot button questions before the conference, such as how are you going to handle Israel and Ukraine aid? How are you going to avoid this government shutdown that's looming on November 18th? And how are you going to pass these appropriations bills? Even the conservative ones that the House Appropriations Committee has produced, they're having trouble clearing the floor. The agriculture bill was held up due to different disputes about spending levels, about abortion, drugs, and so forth.
So the big question is who can get to 217 votes?
That's right, but the vote inside the conference is just a simple majority. So you can see 111 out of the 221 people supporting it and basically get that number.
So what's been the mood of GOP congressmen? What was it over the weekend, and how has it changed? I mean, is there a sense of fatigue that's set in?
I think fatigue is setting in, but there's a lot of outrage actually, and a lot of really high tensions. I was really thought it was very remarkable on Friday the amount of people coming out really red-faced, angry, yelling. This is we see that sometimes in foreign legislatures, the fist fights and so forth. But I think we're almost getting to that point, and they said if these meetings continued, they would actually be physical altercations. People are very angry and also very embarrassed. I think Michael McCall, a serious legislator who is the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, is the most embarrassing thing he's ever been involved in. I think there's just a sense that this disarray can't just keep going. Unfortunately, Congress really only acts with real deadlines, and I'm seeing the November 18th deadline when the government will shut down, when troops will not be paid, that's going to be an action-forcing event. So this could drag on for a few more weeks, but we get to that mid-November deadline. Congress has to act. And when Congress has to act, they tend to get their act together at the very last minute.
Talk about Jim Jordan's candidacy and how that all fell apart.
You know, it was very interesting. He's very, very popular, founder of the House Freedom Caucus in 2015. But members who had been here for a long time remember that Jim Jordan was essentially the Matt Gaetz of that era, someone who was very controversial, who very much picked fights with Speaker Boehner and other longtime appropriators, you know, was really railing against them as rhinos, Republicans in name only. I think institutionalists who are here for a long time have that memory, and I think at some basic level they were unwilling to really support him. You know, we see a list of people on here who have very conservative policies, like Byron Donalds and Kevin Hearn and Mike Johnson, who were basically the same menu but different waiter, as one person said. You know, this is a different set of personalities, and you know, these people perhaps don't have the same enemies that Jim Jordan did, personal enemies in the conference, and may be able to get over the line.
And why do you think he went to three votes? I mean, you know, Scalise was kind of out immediately, but Jim Jordan stayed in, even though he got less and less support with each vote.
Well, it wasn't quite clear, but I will say one thing I found very interesting is he was in backdoor talks with the New York delegation, the 3 members who were very interested in specific policy goals, 9/11 victim funding, and the state and local tax deduction. This is something that was capped under Trump at $10,000 per taxpayer, and they wanted to see that doubled or even tripled. And there was some progress, I'm told, going on in those negotiations. So there was a sense that maybe those guys could come on board, show some momentum, start whittling those numbers down. And there certainly was a sense that if you got into, you know, the single digits, that the opposition would collapse. So I think that they felt it was worth trying. And I think if that closed-door vote that happened on Friday night had gone differently and a bare majority had said continue, he would have continued. He would have continued all weekend and tried to hammer it out. He was a wrestler. That's his approach. He tries to wrestle opponents, a very you know, determined individual in Congress, and that was what he was planning to do.
Bloomberg congressional reporter Eric Wasson from this morning's Washington Journal. The House will be back in session tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and could hold another vote for Speaker when they gavel in. Remember, the House is always live on C-SPAN, and you can find full coverage of the House Speaker election on cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now video app. On Tuesday, the House Foreign Affairs Committee will hold a hearing on support for Israel following the attack by Hamas. And then on Wednesday, President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden will host a state dinner honoring Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Campaign 2024 news now. Former President Donald Trump officially filed his paperwork for the New Hampshire presidential primary today. Candidates have until October 27th to sign up officially, and virtually all of the other Republican candidates have already done so. Following the event, the former president spoke to supporters at a rally in Derry.
I'm pleased to report that I've just come from the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office, where I officially filed for the first in the nation primary. First in the nation. Great honor. And you know who kept you first in the nation, right? There were some evil forces out there, a lot of evil forces around lately, and they didn't want you to stay there. And I said, there's no way we're moving. We don't have the courage to make that move. I don't have that courage. I'd never do that. I said I would not do it, and I didn't do it. You're first in the nation. Congratulations. Our victory here in 2016 rocketed us to the Republican nomination, and New Hampshire will always have a very special place in our heart.
Donald Trump's appearance comes after several of the other Republican candidates spoke at a fundraiser on Friday in Iowa City. That was hosted by Representative Marionette Miller Meeks. And you can get all of our Campaign 2024 coverage, see that event and others at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now free mobile app. Finally, tonight, episode 6 of our series Books That Shaped America. In partnership with the Library of Congress, we're exploring 10 books from American literature that provoked thought, won awards, led to significant societal changes, and are still talked about today. And we're also asking you to join in the conversation by submitting your pick for a book that you think helped shape America. Just go to cspan.org/books that shaped America, all one word. Click the viewer input tab and select record video. Here's some of what you said.
Hi, my name is Amber. I live in D.C. here. And I think that shaped America is probably Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, because they adopted it into that movie with Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden, and it was amazing.
My name is Magnolia Connor, and I am from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I think Wonder is a great book because it teaches kids that it's okay to be different.
Hi, my name is Hope, and I'm from Utah, and one book that I think shaped America was A Tale of Two Cities. The reason that I think that is because it's a story of redemption and a story of family, and I think those are two essential building blocks in a society like ours, and something that can help us if we learn how to forgive and how to be redeemed and how to love each other like family. I think it can help save America.
I think To Kill a Mockingbird really helped shape America because it gave a kid who just thought things were normal a really first-hand look at injustice, and I'm really grateful for that book.
My name is Kelly McCullough. I'm from Midway, Utah, and I think that one book that shaped America is Lord of the Flies, because Lord of the Flies teaches us about sociology and the way that humans interact with each other, and I think it teaches us to be more aware of our selfish nature sometimes, and it has taught humans how to be better than what our human nature tells us. Yes.
Hi, my name is Ruben, and I'm from the state of North Carolina. The book I think that shaped America is the Bible. My reason for picking this book is because it shaped the moral and ethical foundations of the United States as outlined in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. It also shaped the minds of our founding fathers and the great leaders that established our country. Thank you.
My name is Abby, and I'm from Cambridge, Minnesota. One book I think shaped America is One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. And the reason I chose this book is because I believe it inspired kids to dream and to do whatever they want the next day in their lives.
Hi, I'm Tony from San Diego. A book that I think shaped America is The Jungle. It's also my favorite book. I think it's a combination of a great kind of summation of the immigrant story in America, as well as the beginning of the labor rights movement, which is also really important. I think it occurred at a time that was really pivotal in American history, and just a great book overall. So that's it.
Again, go to cspan.org/books that shaped America, all one word. Click the viewer input tab and select record video and tell us your favorite book that shaped America. And then be sure to watch or listen tonight. This week's book is one that Ernest Hemingway said, quote, all modern American literature comes from. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. It was written in 1844 and was controversial from the start because of its subject matter and its use of dialect. None of that stopped her from selling more than 20 million copies worldwide. And tonight we'll talk to Andrew Levy, chairman of the English department at Butler University in Indianapolis, about Huckleberry Finn. Books That Shaped America starts at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You can listen to it here on C-SPAN Radio, watch it on C-SPAN, or stream it on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. And be sure to check out our companion podcast. Our guest this week is Matt Siebold, who is an American literature and Mark Twain studies professor at Elmira College. He is also one of the founding editors of MarkTwainStudies.org. Find out more about Mark Twain with our Books That Shaped America companion podcast. You can find that at cspan.org/podcasts on the podcast tab on the C-SPAN Now free mobile app or wherever you get your podcasts. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast, and it's on YouTube as well. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, sign up for our free daily email word for word. You can go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll discuss the latest on the House Speaker race, first with CQ Roll Call reporter Laura Weiss, and then Ethics and Public Policy Center Senior Fellow and Washington Post columnist Henry Olson. Also, the Quincy Institute's Trita Parsi talks about the latest in the Israel-Hamas conflict. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.